The Pentagon confirms it. Unidentified drones did fly over Langley Air Force Base.
Would begin flying over the base
shortly
shortly
other
after
smaller
dawn.
objects disappear inside of it.
This incident describes a Navy pilot who witnessed an orange-red sphere descending rapidly.
This is a witness who lives in the area.
You guys saw it? You guys saw that?
Yes. Yeah, we saw that.
Orbs swarming an F-22 jet.
They said, all I know, sir, is there was a round object that was going 4 times faster than my F-22.
Langley Air Force Base did experience incursions.
I also was told that if we revealed the name that we would probably get under surveillance.
Hey man, I just saw 2 orange orbs about 10 miles away. I was on the phone with my dad, and I didn't really think anything of it. To be honest, I kind of thought it was like a light on a mountain. And those lights are above where the top of the mountain is by a significant amount. I literally cannot think of anything that could have resembled those lights. 2 orange orbs, no movement.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we'll be talking about a few things that have popped up in the news regarding the UAP topic. Number one, I think the most important thing to come out of this topic recently has been the divulgence of a apparently top secret parent program called Immaculate Constellation.
Immaculate Constellation?
Immaculate Constellation.
Immaculate Constellation.
Immaculate Constellation.
If you're not familiar with this name yet, I think you will be soon. This was initially disclosed by journalist Michael Shellenberger, who did a follow-up interview on Joe Rogan.
Today's piece is about a new whistleblower who has come forward and has written a report. And this is somebody that is either in government or as a government contractor. I've interviewed this person multiple times in person. I've checked their credentials. They are who they say they are. They have written a report and provided it to members of Congress. And in that report, they claim that that the Pentagon is illegally withholding information from Congress about a secret UAP program. And that secret UAP program is considered a parent program of other programs, but it's called Immaculate Constellation. I was told I had it confirmed by a second source that this is the name. I also was told that if we revealed the name that we would probably get under surveillance.
He published an in-depth report on October 9th, 2024 on his platform, Public. His report highlighted that this program handles classified materials related to UAP encounters and operates under an unacknowledged Special Access Program, USAP. The program was reportedly initiated in 2017 following the Pentagon's admission of the ATIP program. Obviously, I have not been subjected to this document, but in his report, Michael Shellenberger mentions that according to the whistleblower who came forward, whose name we do not yet know and who, my guess, might show up in the upcoming November 13th congressional hearing about UAPs. But he says that this special access program tracks, retrieves, and archives data on UFO sightings and encounters. And here are some of the more notable cases that this whistleblower allegedly reported. Number one, Orbs swarming an F-22 jet. This might ring a bell. F-22s were also used to scramble these UAP that sort of popped up last year. But not only that, recently, former President Donald Trump was on a talk show and had mentioned that he had several airline pilots come into his office at that time, speak about these spheres flying around the jet.
They were in the Oval Office, 3 or 4 pilots. These are not people that make up stories. They said, all I know, sir, is there was a round object that was going 4 times faster than my F-22, which is a very fast plane. I mean, 4 or 5 guys I've interviewed, solid people, great pilots for the U.S. Air Force, etc. They've seen things that they cannot explain.
So apparently it prompted this F-22 to disengage from its zone. And yet another incident regarding orange spheres now. This incident describes a Navy pilot who witnessed an orange-red sphere descending rapidly from high altitude. Really interesting because when I went out to North Carolina recently to visit Chris Bledsoe, who I'll mention a little bit later as well because his name ties into a few different things. that I'm going to be talking about. And by the way, that investigation and that video will come out eventually. I'm still working on that. While I was out there, I was with Ryan Bledsoe, his son, who has a podcast. I stopped by on his podcast, by the way. It's called Bledsoe Said So. You should definitely check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. We ended up seeing something akin to what's being described by this Navy pilot, which were these orange glowing orbs. There was like a row of 9 of them over the ocean. There were people who we didn't know that ended up calling the Coast Guard. You guys saw it? You guys saw that?
Yeah, we saw that. That was crazy earlier.
I can't swim out there and get them.
It went up and then it sprayed.
It was a wild experience. I documented the whole thing. We did catch some of them on film. It was an incredible thing to see. And this does sound a lot like what happened there. One of the other notable things that this document mentions, apparently, is ARVs. Now, if you were in and around the UAP topic for the last decade, you would have heard this term being floated around. So ARV stands for Alien Reproductive Vehicles, and it's not like an impregnation vehicle or anything, but reproductive in the sense that it is like a reverse engineered human version of an alien craft. So they're either reverse engineered crafts based on non-human technology or entirely novel designs influenced by such technologies. If this is a parent program, this Immaculate Constellation, meaning there are other programs that are underneath it that we might be uncovering shortly as well. Programs perhaps related to the retrieval or reverse engineering, or maybe some of the projects that people like Bob Lazar worked on. Now, I know recently I did a video, a deep dive into Bob Lazar's latest project, Project Gravitor, and a lot of you, obviously positive comments were overwhelming, but there were some of you out there that were convinced otherwise of Bob's story. To that, I'll say, hey, let's wait till the movie comes out and let's see if there's anything new brought to light. But I will say this, it is interesting that Bob was like the first guy to come out and say he worked on these crafts. Not only did he say he worked on these crafts, but he worked on ones that were intact. Now, we had not really heard about intact crafts in our possession. That was the first time. Before that was Roswell, and we knew that these were crashed crafts that were apparently dragged down to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. Again, there's a lot of speculation on that story. I've been down those rabbit holes, trust me. But I am as well going to wait until further evidence or further, anything is brought to light before really clamping down and holding on to some type of opinion. I think I'll leave my mind open until that day happens. We're getting sidetracked. The program reportedly contains a robust collection of imagery, including infrared, forward-looking infrared, so FLIR cameras, full-motion video, FMVs, and other types of surveillance footage documenting these UAP encounters. One of the really interesting things that was brought to my attention, the search term Immaculate Constellation wasn't a popular search term. In fact, it was only ever searched, apparently according to Google Trends, a few times before in June of 2023 near, you guessed it, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. So we had a spike back then, and we have a spike now because the project came out. And you know what else came out in June of 2023? David Grush. Although David Grush never mentioned Immaculate Constellation, it is interesting that when he came out, somebody, perhaps near that Air Force Base started frantically Googling to see if he had leaked the name of the project. That was very interesting, and I do believe that since then, that Google Trends has been deleted. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that happened. I think I saw a tweet floating around there. Could be wrong. I'll look into it. Wright-Patterson has a historic reputation and has been rumored to house, the crafts that were retrieved from Roswell initially. If you want to actually find out more about this, I just recently watched an Unsolved Mysteries. They just premiered it recently, but Unsolved Mysteries had put out an episode of Roswell, which I thought was so interesting. They really, really deep dove. I was surprised how deep they went into speaking with, witnesses who were there, including Jesse Marcel, I believe his name was, the guy in the picture with the quote-unquote weather balloon from Roswell, who did come forward years later and said, it was a cover-up. There was no weather balloon. There were actual pieces of the craft. So it's really interesting. If you don't know anything about the Roswell incident, I suggest you go check that out. Keep an open mind. Have a look at it, no pun intended, but all of this talk about Immaculate Constellation and everything else, it kind of feels like the stars are aligning. Another interesting alignment, if you will, is if you look at this program named Immaculate Constellation, and they are in charge of all the sort of imagery and videos and all that type of stuff, you do have to assume that they also have access to satellite imagery. And one of the most secretive departments in all of the intelligence agencies in the United States is the National Reconnaissance Office, NRO.
In 1958, with presidential authorization, the Air Force and the CIA began working on a top-secret program to develop systems to collect intelligence from space.
Now, these people have been putting up satellites and spy satellites into space for decades. And not only have they been gathering imagery, from potential hostile, entities, but also maybe extraterrestrial, who knows? That's speculating, I get it. But at the same time, it's the only other place where you clearly see constellations. You see, these are patches that represent different satellites that were launched into space. Each of these patches represents a different mission. Yes, folks, these are real. These are absolutely real. You can Google them. You'll even find images of the satellites with these giant, wacky-looking crests on them. Now, we could spend probably an entire episode looking at each one of these patches and dissecting them. And if that's something you want to get into, I'll happily do that. Just let me know in the comments. I've got them all. I mean, pick any one of them. They are very interesting. There's a lot of symbology here. And I mean, just things that look a little shady. And I don't know if it's because the NRO has this sick sense of humor or if they're secretly trying to tell us something. If they're overtly using Egyptian, the Eye of Horus, or like these giant octopus in space, or like these constellations, it has to be a joke, right? They wouldn't be that blatant about it. Either way, maybe it is. Maybe they do have a sense of humor, but I do believe that if you were gathering intel from all of these different places, you would have no choice but to also gather it from the satellites. And so I just think it's interesting that these constellations, because that's something that's always stood out to me with these patches, that they all have these little constellations. Now, these constellations could also just mean that they have this oversight into, they are the overseeing celestial body that looks over the earth and that keeps track of everything, kind of like the constellations above our heads, or they could have a deeper meaning. I don't know. But I just found it really fascinating that Immaculate Constellation was the name. And if we look at constellations, and if we look at the word immaculate, deriving obviously from, Immaculate Conception, from the Virgin Mary and this type of stuff, there starts to become a bit of a tie-in between, this whole esoteric or spiritual or religious realm that ties into the UFO stuff. It all becomes very, very complicated. I haven't quite formed an opinion, and my investigation on this stuff is still ongoing, but there is a connection there somewhere. I just haven't really connected the dots quite yet, I think. Also, what's really interesting is that George Knapp was recently featured on a trailer launching, I believe, November 8th, so almost a week before the congressional hearing, which is great timing. I'm sure he had a hand in that. But he's releasing a documentary called Investigation Alien, and this looks great. He also teases a little bit on the Weaponized podcast. I'll leave that link below as well. But he does talk about one of these transmedium crafts, meaning one of these UAP, diving into water and becoming a USO, an unidentified submerged object. And the more we sort of look into this stuff, the more that I think that's really popping up. Is something's in the waters. I might do an eventual deep dive into that, but I do have some friends that have researched this quite extensively, and maybe I'll bring them on the podcast and they can speak to that themselves. But there has definitely been a lot of activity in the water. If you noticed coastal Air Force bases or Navy bases being involved with sightings, such as Commander Fravers was and Graves. It's really interesting. Also, that leak or that quote-unquote whistleblower on 4chan a year and a half ago. I don't know if some of you read that. That was a really interesting document about how, UAPs or USOs existed and that they were monitoring this, construction facility in the ocean. Listen, I don't know either. I just like reading about this stuff because I find it highly fascinating. That's the thing about this whole topic that I really enjoy, is that you can take it as fiction and it's still fascinating, or you could take it as fact and obviously it'll change your whole life. But I choose to remain somewhere in between. All right, there's something going on. I know that. I know there's something going on. We have proof of that. UAPs exist. What's driving them? Your guess is as good as mine. I know a lot of you are very vocal in the comments and sound off if you think you know, but I firmly believe that we don't know yet, most of us anyways. But we're eager to find out. So Nancy Mace will be leading the congressional hearing on UAPs November 13th. I probably will be doing a watch party for that on my Discord if you guys want to come hang out and we can just watch it together. I think it's going to be exciting. I think it's going to be interesting, and hopefully we'll get some more information on this program called Immaculate Constellation. Or maybe more. Maybe we'll get some clarification on, metamaterials or the submerged objects, or just simply, some close encounter stories. Whatever it is, I'm looking forward to it, and I think it's really interesting. Now I wanted to mention another thing that popped up in the news, which were these two photos of alleged spheres or jellyfish-like UAPs / Afghanistan Reapers is what they're allegedly being called. There's a podcast called Chaos Moogle, and a few days ago, somebody reached out to him, an alleged whistleblower by the name of Ghost, and dropped these two photos. Now, if they look sort of familiar, there was something called the Mosul Sphere. Jeremy Corbell had released an image of a sphere in Iraq that was captured by a U.S. camera, and this thing was moving quite rapidly through the sky. From a top-down angle, you can see this orb sort of moving about, and this would allegedly show what the orb looked like from underneath, seemingly having these dripping tendrils made of molten metal underneath it, which is something straight out of a sci-fi movie, man. This is terrifying if this is real. Now, I can't speak to the source. I can't say if this is AI. Your guess is as good as mine. Let me know in the comments if you believe this stuff. But what I can find, I just like to find interesting connections. And recently, Jesse Mitchells, who, by the way, has a great channel on YouTube, covers most of the UAP topics very thoroughly and is very knowledgeable on this stuff. Well, he recently had on Lou Elizondo, and they chatted about a certain jellyfish type. And almost in between conversations, Lou had sort of alluded to something called angel hair. He said that these orbs, these metallic spheres, would shed their outer layer. I don't know how he knows this, by the way, but he did work at ATIP, All-Domain Anomaly Threat Identification Program at the Pentagon. He was a part of that. He wrote a book on it, but he says that these orbs shed their... Watch the clip.
Right, and by the way, there's other accounts of jellyfish. A lot.
Now
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
Oh yeah, there's actually a DVD on it. I can send it to you, yeah.
Are they dropping anything? Because I know there's some cases where there's molten lava and whatnot.
Yeah, well, assembled lava. There's a reference to something called angel hair, which refers to a slewing off or sloughing off of the outer layer of the vehicle, and it drips down onto almost like a residue or like molten metal on the ground. And that is referred to as angel hair. I talk about in my book that the external part of the craft may be ablative, sacrificial.
He also mentioned that by doing this, they leave behind some type of metamaterial. What was interesting is that when I spent time with Chris Bledsoe, who wrote the book UFO of God, who has obviously been in touch with many, many factions of intelligence agencies in the United States, lots of things that he posts to Instagram that are quite amazing. Well, in his book, he details the fact that one of these orbs ended up dripping a unknown substance onto his driveway. Now, this is years before we heard about this, which is really interesting. Is this AI? Is this made up? I don't know, but the connections sure are interesting. What do you think? And lastly, I want to talk about something that came up recently. Man, we got a lot of news in the UFO sphere right now, but lastly, I want to talk about what happened in 2023, I think December 2023, at the Langley Air Force Base.
New reports that mysterious drones are swarming a U.S. military base and did so for 17 days in December of last year.
The Pentagon confirms that unidentified drones did fly over Langley Air Force Base in Hampton.
Home to the F-22 Raptors, noticed over a period of 17 days, dozens of unidentified drones would begin flying over the base shortly after dusk each night.
Langley Air Force Base is the East Coast home to F-22 Raptors.
Langley Air Force Base did experience incursions of unauthorized unmanned aerial systems last year in December 2023.
The Pentagon is still not saying what officials think these things really are.
This is a witness who lives in the area nearby, and he described seeing these drones he estimated to be about the size of cars.
If this was like a solo incident, I would say, all right, yeah, I don't know, maybe drone, maybe foreign adversary. But apparently these drones, quote unquote, were there for 17 days. Now, folks, we all know what the United States is capable of doing if you're invading their airspace. We've seen it happen last year. How are they going to let something hover over the base for 17 days without taking it down? That sounds a little extreme. So recently, Chris Mellon came forward and talked about how these UFO motherships, UAP motherships, were seen hovering around military installations.
Object, craft appear, it was brightly lit. He saw the other smaller objects disappear inside of it, and he said that thing took off like nothing he's ever seen.
Now, this is coming from a top Pentagon official, somebody who worked at the Pentagon, saying that there are motherships dropping off these tiny orbs up and around these Air Force bases or sensitive areas. I'll read it here. They claim that UFO motherships were seen over many U.S. military bases recently. And then we have this drone swarm that was up there for 17 days unchecked. And then recently, check this video out. This is spotted from a fisherman near Langley Air Force Base, is this line of lights in the sky. Now, at first you might think that's just Starlink satellites. And then you realize that oh no, those aren't satellites at all. Those are some type of, I don't know, they're hovering. They're kind of just chilling there. Are they making a sound? I can't tell from the video, but I can tell you that they're not moving, so this has to be drones. If they're not drones, then what the heck are we dealing with here? And if they are drones, why aren't we taking these things down? Leads you to a lot of questions. That's all I got to say. I just got a lot more questions. I have no answers for you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just here to, kind of like connect some dots, let you guys, maybe there's something out there that you guys know that I don't know. And if so, let me know. And you can do that by calling in 8333 area 52. That's our toll-free number, 8333 area 52. At the top of the episode, you heard somebody talk about an encounter that they had. That was them calling in. You got a minute to do that on the call. If you exceed a minute, just call back and you'll get another minute. You can also reach out via our Discord. I'll leave the link below. Our Discord is free. You can come hang out and join and chat all about this stuff. And we get into some pretty deep conversations. And if you want to take it further and also help support this channel and these endeavors, then I highly suggest you go to Patreon. Go to patreon.com/area52investigations, where we upload very, very frequently these days. We've just uploaded a 40-minute interview, an uncut interview with Luigi Veditelli from Project Gravator, and I cut probably 80% of that interview for the video I did about Bob Lazar. So there's a whole bunch of stuff he talks about in there that we didn't even get into. If you want to check that out, that's on Patreon as well. Lots of great stuff. I'm not going to sell you on it too much. Go have a look for yourselves and determine if it's worth it. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Let me know what you thought about this episode and what you think about these specific things. I would love to hear your take on it, and I would love for you guys to get involved in this conversation. The more we talk about it, the more normalized it becomes, and the more, the more information we're going to get from it. But looking forward to seeing what's going to happen here in the future shortly, and hopefully you guys tune in for it. Stay safe, leave a like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.